I like everything that has to do with hi-fi, be it entry-level, mid-fi, or say like kidney hi-fi. However, there are several things that weren't really hi-fi enough for me, and those are true wireless IEMs and wireless headphones. In the last 3 years, I didn't post a single review for such creations, not because I didn't have them, actually I owned most of them, all of those Bose, Sony, Sennheiser, Bowers and Wilkins. And while some of them were cool from a technology point of view, none of them were hi-fi enough sounding for me. However, that is going to change today with the Hifiman Svanar Wireless, and let me explain you why. In a true wireless IEM or wireless headphones, there are 5 very important stages that have to do with audio transmission, and let's talk about them. First of all is the Bluetooth sender, and that can be your phone, your tablet, your laptop, your PC, your audio player. And while the sender itself is not so important, the Bluetooth codec in which that data package is being sent is extremely important. As I'm talking this and explaining this to you, there isn't today a Bluetooth codec that can send a beat-perfect data stream without losing some information, mostly because Bluetooth doesn't have such a wide bandwidth like Wi-Fi, for example. In time, of course, better Bluetooth senders were made, better Bluetooth codecs were made, and as far as I know, some of the best codecs available right now is Sony's LDAC, which can send up to 990 kilobytes per second. That is almost lossless quality if you are listening to 16-bit PCMe files, but not exactly bit perfect. As a small point of comparison, the only available Bluetooth codecs on iOS devices are AAC and CBC, which can send up to 320 kilobits per second. So that is basically 3 times lower than LDAC. Sadly, Apple and Qualcomm are not friends anymore, and I'm not sure if LDAC codec or any other codecs like aptX HD would be available on iOS devices. Honestly, I don't think that will happen. I think Apple should do some their own Bluetooth codecs. Sadly, very few wireless headphones and true wireless IEM makers are using that marvelous LDAC codec because they need to pay a fee to Sony, and of course nobody wants to do that, subsequently using lower quality codecs and losing data packages while doing so. The second stage is the Bluetooth receiver, which sits exactly in the wireless IEMs, in the wireless headphones, which is doing a handshake with the wireless sender. The third stage is the digital to analog converter, or the DAC section. Sadly, all of those modern Bluetooth receivers already have a very small DAC section in the same chip, and that one is not so impressive. Sadly, all of those Sennheisers, Sonys, and so on are using that exact DAC section, which is not so great. The fourth stage is the headphone amplifier, and again, those modern Bluetooth receivers already have a DAC section and they have a headphone amplifier. Everything sits on a single chip, and again, that one is not so impressive. It's good enough, but not really impressive. And the last stage is the diaphragm, or the headphone drivers which are being used, which can be great, which can be not so great, depending on the brand, on the technology, and so on. Some people think that only the drivers are important, but actually all those 5 stages are super important, because if one of those is not so great, you are bottlenecking the final performance. When I took a closer look at Hifiman Svanar IEMs, I was pleasantly surprised to find that all 5 stages were taken care of, trying to preserve the signal purity as much as possible. First of all, they support all those fancy Bluetooth codecs, including Sony's LDAC. But for that, you'll need an Android device because, again, Apple and Qualcomm are not best friends, but I hope that is going to change soon. Secondly, Hifiman developed their own R2R ladder DAC in each of these IEMs. That is crazy just to think about that. They have tens of resistors which are decoding those zeros and ones into sound waves. Thirdly, they also made an actual headphone amplifier section which sits inside, which provides 45 milliwatts of power in 32 ohms per IEM, which is again quite impressive. And lastly, they are using those topology drivers which were first introduced on Svanar wired IEMs, which by the way are costing $2,000 US. The so-called topology driver features a special nano coating which was applied to the surface of the driver, making them clearer sounding but also more natural sounding at the same time. So for all those 5 reasons, these are basically the very first true audiophile grade IEMs that I know of, and that's exactly what makes me so excited about these IEMs. These are also quite smart. They have touch controls, you can do voice coils, you have those voice assistants of Google, Microsoft and Apple, so these are definitely quite smart. Build quality wise, Hifiman combined carbon fiber with this glossy plastic shell, trying to reduce their weight as much as possible, as frankly a lot of tech was crammed in each IEM. 8 pairs of silicone ear tips were included, and to my surprise they fit my ears perfectly. I usually don't use IEMs due to poor fit and comfort, but these are fitting perfectly, and as much as I have tried walking or running around, they didn't fall off. You can expect a battery life of around 7 hours on a single charge, and including charging case adds 20 hours of music playback, which is quite amazing. A single IEM weighs just 8 grams and the charging case 83 grams, so these are very lightweight, very easy to carry around. And in the end, we are getting a full audiophile package consisting of an R2R DAC, headphone amplifier, and high-end IEMs. This is pretty much it, so let's check how these are sounding. Hifiman is offering 3 sound modes with these IEMs. You have transparency mode, offering up to 7 hours of use, noise cancelling up to 6 hours of use, and HiFi mode, which offers up to 4 hours of use because you are basically unlocking the full potential of that R2R DAC and headphone amplifier. I just returned from a short city break from Venice, Italy, and the only things that I took with me were these Svanar IEMs and my phone, which together they're working just great with that LDAC codec. And if you ever visited Venice, you know that that is a very, very crowded city. And of course, noise cancelling was just a godsend. And while the noise cancelling worked just fine, I observed that these are not cancelling a particular range in the frequency response. These are trying to cancel basically everything down to a certain degree. So in my opinion, these are working fine, but not exactly on the same level with those Bose and Sony IEMs. Those are doing better. So in my flight, many people talking around me, I still could hear them a little bit. The Sonys are working better in that regard, but I do believe for Hifiman, these are doing just fine in terms of noise cancellation. The second mode was transparency mode, which basically boosts a little bit the mid-range, so you can hear the people talking around you without taking down your IEMs. In this regard, they worked just fine. I could talk with anybody, even a few meters away, and I could hear them loud and clear, so that was great. And the last mode is, of course, the HiFi mode, which I'm sure most of you are interested in. Now, if you are using entry to mid-level Hifiman desktop headphones, then you'll observe 2 things from the start. First of all, finally, we can talk about technicalities in a true wireless IEMs, like transit response, like soundstage, like detail retrieval, like transparency, which is great. And secondly, they are not sounding like those entry to mid-level Hifiman headphones that are trying to emphasize a little bit the treble output. These are sounding more like their Svanar wired IEMs and more like Susvara put on some proper HiFi setups. So these are more organic and more lifelike sounding for sure. After some clever tinkering with my PC and mini DSP ears, I was finally able to measure their frequency response and their overall performance. I used IEM diffuse field compensation files provided by mini DSP for my particular rig, and this is their raw frequency response. Do note that I have sent a 94 dB signal, so everything that is above that point is an elevation, and everything that is below is a roll-off. I zoomed this reading quite a lot, and in reality I don't hear such a big difference in the frequency response. The first thing that impresses, and you can actually visualize it, is the bass, and more exactly the mid-bass region, which feels stronger than any other region, adding oomph and punch into the lowest octaves. The whole bass and mid-range region is absolutely fantastic, and these are quite probably the most organic sounding IEMs coming from the Hifiman. The treble was gently boosted in the most sensitive part of our hearing, which adds some sparkle and definition, and there is another rise at around 15 kHz, which again adds plenty of detail and sparkle in that region. Although from the reading it might appear that these are bright sounding IEMs, in reality they never bothered me with their treble delivery, which I found extended and clean sounding, but without being harsh or edgy sounding. This is their distortion reading, but this reading is not 100% accurate because the CBC codec was used in between my PC and Svanar Wireless, which adds some delay and seriously limits the data transfer. However, you can see that in between 100 Hz and 6 kHz, the distortion sits at 0.1%, which is honestly very impressive, considering that I sent a 94 dB signal. Waterfall combines their spectral decay and frequency response into a single graph, and you can see the bass region isn't as fast as the rest of the spectrum, but that's fine. All single driver IEMs are working like this. And finally, this is their spectrogram, which surprised me with how efficient and tight are these drivers. You can see some tiny vibrations in the 20, 50 and 100 Hz regions. Apart from that, these are incredibly tight and fast sounding drivers. Discarding all my measurements, subjectively speaking, I do believe that Hifiman Svanar Wireless will impress you on the technical level, especially considering that we are talking about a $499 package. So these, of course, won't outperform the Susvaras in terms of technical performance, but when it comes to tonality, they sound very, very close to Susvara and to Svanar Wired, which, by the way, are considerably more expensive. The transit response was improved on these ones versus the regular true wireless IEMs of Sony and Sennheiser. You can feel that the sound is faster, and you can feel that with fast electronic music, for example. While fun and super engaging the sound of those Sony and Sennheiser IEMs, they have a really strong bass performance. I can feel that with Svanar I have the same energy in the bass, but the overall, the bass quality is considerably better. You have, a much clearer type of bass. You have the bass is coming in waves somehow. You have more texture around the bass. It's more clearer, so definitely a much higher quality type of bass. And besides having faster transients and a much higher quality type of bass, everything that has to do with transparency, with detailed retrieval, all those small nuances, was improved by a notch or two versus those Sony and Sennheiser IEMs. So quite a big difference in terms of transparency. Well, it might sound a little weird to you, but I felt that they opened up after a few days of use. And I'm pretty sure that that art while the DAC section needs a few days to settle in. Detail retrieval is good, even great, considering their price point, but please don't expect them to outperform some high-end digital audio players used with high-end IEMs. That is not going to happen. These are going into the same direction, but these are not trying to dethrone all and everything. The soundstage is also good, so there is more than enough air in between the notes. The depth, the note separation is good as well, but in typical artware fashion, you won't find a lot of sharpness, super strong leading edges, because Hifiman put a much bigger accent on the sweetness of the sound, on the textures, on the fullness of the sound. That will be very apparent with the Hifiman Svanar. Now, Hifiman, of course, tried to outperform all those true wireless IEMs, and I do believe they succeeded with their engineering skills and everything that has to do with digital download converters, headphone amplifiers, and single driver IEMs. In the end, you might dislike their look maybe a little bit, their alien-looking charging case, their above average noise cancelling, and their short battery life and Hi-Fi mode. But when it comes to music playback with that LDAC codec, this will sound at least 1 or 2 levels above any of those true wireless IEMs. This is also smarter compared to any of their wireless creations. You have voice assistants, you have voice calls. You can even charge their charging case with a wireless charger, which is pretty nifty. Hifiman Svanar Wireless are great sounding for the price, and I'll be using them in my trips around the world, that is for sure. That's all for now. Please stay positive, and I'll see you around.